It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for season 11 of The Walking Dead. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a very popular theory for season 11 of The Walking Dead, which has to do with Negan's end coming to the show in the final season, but in a way where Negan gets Rick's final comic arc. Now, obviously, if you haven't read the comics, you probably don't want to watch this video because it will spoil major events for you, even though they can't do that exactly because obviously Rick is not in the TV show. They are gonna do an adaptation, so if you don't want to know anything, you probably don't want to watch the rest of this video. So with that said, we're gonna take a look at whether Negan can get that story and how they're gonna have to remix it for it to work if they're going to go that route. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break this down. Alright, as always, before we jump into this, if you're not a subscriber and enjoy the content by the end, consider subscribing to join our community, share and smash the like button, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. Now, we recently did a very similar video looking at who could possibly get Rick's comic arc. In that other video, we actually looked at the possibility that Aaron could get that and problems with Aaron getting that death. If you haven't checked that out, make sure to do so. However, I will go through a brief summary of what I talked about there, at least the parts that have to do with the events that happened in the comic book, so that way non-comic readers will have a little bit of context before we dive into the Negan conversation. So obviously when the group gets to Commonwealth, it's Rick that's actually hopeful. He's optimistic about the community. He's trying to make it work. Even though there's some tension within the group, people disagree with him, he still has hope that they can make things work with Commonwealth. Obviously, he has no choice. In the comic book at that time, the Alexandria safe zone was destroyed, or it was just about destroyed. They are following that same kind of arc in the show as well because we see Alexandria is deteriorating. So we know that they're probably going that same direction when it comes to what Alexandria looks like and how inhabitable it is. But going back to what I said, Rick is hopeful about the community, and that hope and that desperation is exactly what leads him to execute one of the survivors, Dwight, who is in his camp. In the comics, Dwight was actually Rick's right-hand man. And the reason why Rick killed Dwight is because Dwight didn't agree with Rick on how to handle the Commonwealth, and he wasn't as optimistic about the Commonwealth and the fact that they could be changed for the better. So he took an opportunity and he threatened the Commonwealth's leader, Pamela Milton. And obviously, to diffuse the situation, Rick executed Dwight. He actually did more than diffuse the situation. He actually made an extreme decision which made things a lot worse. But what Rick did, executing one of his own team members, was actually the trigger or the catalyst to why Sebastian did what he did. Sebastian, Pamela Milton's son, already didn't like this group. He had a problem with them. And in the comics, he was a little brat, and obviously being called out for that didn't really sit well with him. But aside from that whole thing, what Rick did made Sebastian see the survivors as a threat. He saw Rick as someone who could blow at any moment, a person who wasn't predictable, someone who could take over if he wanted to at any moment, you know what I mean? So because of that, Sebastian came up with this plan to kill Rick while he was sleeping. And obviously, he was able to do it. He did execute Rick Grimes. And what happened after that, the events that followed, put Commonwealth in a state of chaos. And it led to a civil war or a mini civil war within the Commonwealth itself, which obviously at the end led to the survivors taking over and leading the Commonwealth in a way that they saw fit and in a way that they didn't think that Lance Hornsby and Pamela Milton were running things before. And because of that, Rick became a symbol. He became the symbol of fighting back against the oppressors, and he became a monument for freedom. Hence why they built his statue at the Commonwealth. This is the final moment of Rick's story in the comic book. He became a statue. He became a monument of freedom, like I said. Alright, so with that context out of the way, let's dive in. So, the first problem that we see right off the bat is Negan is not the type of character to be hopeful in a community. It's just not in his nature to put himself in a position where he's vulnerable to having that much hope in a community to commit something that extreme. Killing one of the survivors in his own camp. It's not necessarily his own camp at this point, but you get what I mean. But with that said, if they remix it to a point where they ignore the being hopeful part, it might actually work. Like they could do something along the lines of having Negan going through that extreme measure of executing someone in his own camp, but not necessarily because he's hopeful in the community, but because there's just no other option. And also because he feels like this is something he needs to do to keep himself and others that have tagged along with him safe. Now, in terms of who could be getting Dwight's comic arc, getting executed, I think it could be Alden. And the reason for that is because they've already done a lot of setup with Negan and Alden. There's like some sort of rivalry going on between them. And also based on what they did in Season 11, Episode 2, Acreon Part 2, by having Maggie completely ignore Alden and do what she felt like she needed to do, as selfish as it may have been, to deal with the Gage situation, that also puts Maggie and Alden on opposite ends. Like what we saw build tension between these two characters in a way where it might make it difficult to come back from. And also mixing that with the Alden Negan situation could make this story come together. Something else they could do to make this story even better is not just have Negan executing Alden like Rick did in the comics with Dwight. They could remix it in such a way where even though it's not Negan who's hopeful in Commonwealth, it's Maggie who's hopeful in the community, and she may even order Negan to execute Alden because he's stepping out of line. He would be throwing away any chance that the group might have to being accepted into the community. So Maggie and Negan could be on the same page about dealing with Alden the way that Rick dealt with Dwight in the comics, which is just execute him and show who's in charge. Now with that first piece out of the way, assuming that all of that works out, there's a second piece to the story. Like I said earlier, in the comics, everything that happened between Rick and Dwight led to Sebastian going after Rick and executing him in his sleep because, like I said, Sebastian saw Rick as a loose cannon, as someone who can't be trusted, someone who could take over if he wanted to. If you think about it, if it is in fact Negan that executes Alden, that could work a lot better because in the TV version, or even the comic version for that matter, Negan is more of a loose cannon than Rick ever was. So that whole thing with Sebastian coming after Negan would be more organic in the TV show than how it went in the comics, because in the comics there was a lot of assumptions that the audience had to make in terms of why Sebastian did what he did. A lot of people still think that Sebastian just executed Rick because he was bitter about how everyone treated him. I don't think that's the case. I think, like I said, Sebastian wanted to end a potential rebellion from happening by executing Rick, which obviously backfired on him. So if they do in fact have Negan being the one that executes one of the survivors, I could definitely see Sebastian going after Negan to kill him, who would do anything to become the leader if he wants to be. With all of that said, there's a third piece to this puzzle, which is the Rick becoming a symbol of rebellion in the comics. That whole thing will never work with Negan in the TV show. I just don't see Negan becoming that symbol like Rick was in the comics. It would be very cheesy, in my opinion, to have Negan's statue being built and for him to become the face of freedom. You know what I mean? So that whole thing will never work. So they're obviously gonna have to remix that. So even though the first 2 pieces to this puzzle could work out by including Maggie in the story and having Maggie and Negan partially both getting the Rick comic arc, I don't think that final piece of the puzzle will ever work. And that final piece of the puzzle is big enough, in my opinion, for the whole thing to not really work. Because the only reason I think Rick's final comic arc worked as great as it did was because there was these different layers and these different pieces. So if you eliminate one of these pieces, then the whole thing doesn't quite fit as much as it should. You know what I mean? So that might be enough for them to decide not to give this story to Negan. That's pretty much everything I wanted to go through in this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to share and smash the like button. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe to join our community, share and smash the like button, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.